Okay, let me go ahead and introduce this session. Now, this is a very interesting session. It's a mock COC. And what a mock COC is Marcus, who everybody here, I think, probably knows, so I don't actually need to introduce him. The circumstances are, he came on to this grant after already having started a PhD. And so he, technically speaking, has already fulfilled his COC requirements with a project that has nothing to do with what he's doing now. And so the powers that be said that he doesn't need to do a COC, and his supervisory team said everybody should do a COC. That's good for your health. good to pull things together, and so on and so forth. So this is a mock COC. So it's like a COC, but there's no panel and all that sort of stuff. Now, we've also had, we were going to schedule 2 COCs, but there were scheduling problems with the other one, the other student, Diane Carroll, who was also working on the same grant. And so I decided I would go ahead and just fill in the second half, and I'll tell you a little bit about an in-progress project that I'm working on now as well. However, I did today look at the schedule for upcoming brown bag lunches, and we collectively, particularly our academics, not our students, have been very negligent in that there should be an expectation that every academic should present at least once a year, and also bring in one interesting dynamic guest to present as well. And we have many holes in the very near future. And so I'm going to send out a request that for people to volunteer. And so please do so. And if you don't, I'll come and twist your arms in a friendly, metaphorically friendly sort of way. But without further ado, let's turn it over to Marcus.
Thank you, Herb. Hello, yes, I'm Marcus. And I'm going to be talking about my PhD today, looking at the state of school principals' well-being, more specifically the impact of education policy and passion. Alright, so school principals are vital to a nation's socioeconomic outcomes. Principals play a big role in student academic motivation and success, and also they are responsible for creating an environment which fosters well-being of both students and teachers. However, they have been reporting very high levels of burnout and different types of strain, and this is only increasing over time and at a rapid rate, in addition to very high attrition rates. Also, there's been a significant decline in the amount of people applying for school principals' positions, and within 3 years' time, approximately 70% of all school principals within Australia are reaching retirement age. So we're very close to approaching this crisis mode. So the question is, why are they suffering from such high strain and attrition? So one reason may be due to the global education reform movement. Effectively, this sweeping notion of policies and commercialisation of the education industry along the West, with key things such as decentralisation and having individual schools and so on being more accountable. And like for example with the CARA, there's then now the national assessments, and also like the My School website, which has the different rankings of schools and so on. So, for example, state specific, I am going to talk about local schools, local decisions, and also the framework for improving student outcomes, so New South Wales and Victoria. So they are very similar in what they require principals, teachers and so on to do, and they advertise themselves and tout that, oh, we're going to be giving principals much more autonomy and freedom, they're going to be able to work with different communities like teachers and students and so on to really meet the individual needs of their students, and we're giving them that freedom. But in reality, they've just been effectively given all these additional resources which initially were associated with state departments, and they haven't been given any additional resources to cope with that. So another potential reason for the increase is, on a more personal level, is passion. So principals report extremely high levels of passion when you consider the average person in the workplace. And also that passion has got a positive relationship with burnout and strain. Issue with this is, though, there currently isn't a passion model which can be applied to the workplace specifically effectively. And there is a lot of research saying that it really needs to distinguish whether passion as a concept itself, whether it is dichotomous or on a continuum. So the aims overall of my PhD, I guess would fall into two different parts. The first one being looking at the specific demands and resources of school principals at this point in time, and then also looking at the impact of specific education policies on such demands and resources, and associated outcomes such as burnout and job satisfaction. The second component is looking at passion and how, if that is a relevant component, and how it impacts principal burnout. So yeah, and ultimately, this information hopefully will help policymakers when designing new policies to address this impeding issue to the education industry. State governments have also already started to announce that they do recognise this as a significant problem. I think the Victorian government, for example, announced around 4 million or something to be put to use to alleviate the issues. But the problem is, if we only have like 3 years or something, then you need to make sure it's done right. Okay, so part one. Alright, so in order to determine the demands, resources, and the associated impacts, I will be using the job demands and resources theory, and you can see here this is just the basic model. Effectively it says that higher demands lead to higher amounts of employee strain, higher resources lead to higher amounts of employee engagement or job satisfaction, and the interaction between influence that relationship. This does mean that although someone may have a job which has excessively high demands, if they do also have high levels of resources, it doesn't necessarily mean they will be suffering from burnout, and vice versa. So considering the school principal job in general, I believe there are 4 different dimensions which you can really consider they would fall into with regards to demands. So quantitative demands, cognitive demands, emotional demands, and also a demand for hiding emotion. I'll go through these now. So quantitatively, principals are leaders. They're advisors to policymakers and communities. They're in charge of financial budgeting, recruitment, teacher evaluations. They usually have a teaching load themselves. They design and implement programs. And that list obviously isn't exhaustive, so they have all these different responsibilities. And then when we think of the cognitive demands, they all have to do this simultaneously. They have to remember a lot of things at the same time, also the different responsibilities that principals do have also draw from very specific and very different skill sets. So it's not as though you can just hone one particular skill and then that will work. Being a principal, you have to be an expert at effectively everything. And with regards to emotional demands, principals are mediators with a lot of stakeholders. They have to deal with relationships with students and teachers and teachers and teachers and teachers and parents and da-da-da-da-da. And they have to make sure it's all working cohesively and everyone gets along. They also come with a lot of emotionally challenging situations. They have not only a moral but a legal responsibility to look after their students and so on. So if you do get students that come in that have been things such as like child abuse or something at home, they actually have duty of care to make sure that they report such things and get things sorted. And at the same time, the situation itself, it is a very emotionally demanding type of task. And with regards to principal and parent interactions, such instances were only second to the extent of quantitative demands with regards to sources of stress. So that because of the emotional component. And with regards to the demand for hiding emotion, principals, it's coined as the display rule. Principals always need to act like they are these rational, in control, powerful beings that, they can handle anything. So even if they are going into completely uncharted territory or very difficult situations, they have to just act like, oh yes, that's whatever, I'll do it, that's not a problem, blah, blah, blah. When in reality, inside, they could be having a complete meltdown. And at the same time, they actually have to change their disposition based on the specific scenario or situation. So even if there is a child which they don't feel upset or annoyed, they may actually really be happy about the behaviour of a child, if the behaviour goes against the school policy or whatever, they have to pretend and act very disappointed and upset and all these different emotions that they have to display, which realistically they may actually not be feeling, which is again a very big toll on someone. So now thinking of key resources which I'll be looking at, autonomy. So autonomy has been touted, I'm assuming everyone knows what autonomy is here. Autonomy effectively assists with jobs, especially with those with high demands, because it does assist with an ability to craft your job into a manner which works best for you, for example. Self-efficacy has also been shown to be negatively related to burnout, and even Theresa's research herself, she has found that it does assist with, for example, with teachers and their ability to handle classroom disruptions and so on. Possibilities for development, considering the extent of skills and responsibilities that principals have themselves. I think it's very relevant. It's been shown that having such possibilities leads to higher job satisfaction in addition to a reduction in burnout. And finally, social support. Again, really considering the emotional component of their jobs. There have been numerous studies, especially focusing on nurses and police officers that also have very emotionally demanding type of positions, where such support, it really makes a massive difference in the extent of reported burnout and strain. So all of the participants from the studies I'll be doing are sourced from Associate Professor Phil Riley's principal survey and his project. It's effectively his baby. He started in 2011. It's collecting a yearly survey from school principals. He has surveyed approximately half of Australian school principals, so it's a pretty awesome feat. And of those principals, about 20-28% of them have done the survey every single year since its inception. Alright, so the measures to actually look at those specific components within the JDR model mostly will be sourced from the Copenhagen Psychosocial Questionnaire. Just an example of each of the items there. They're made up of 4 items to make those specific latent variables. So you can see the demands, the 3 of the resources there, and also the outcomes I'll be looking at with burnout and job satisfaction. But with reference to autonomy, it's different, where there'll be 10 different items actually asking specifically for the principals to ask the extent of autonomy they feel they have in particular areas, which, because these policies, for example, have been touting that they are giving increased autonomy stuff, it really does mean we can break it down to the percentages rather than just having this holistic autonomy latent variable. So the research questions for my first study is, well, so do the job demands that I've identified lead to high levels of reported burnout? How do the extent of resources mitigate that or lead to job satisfaction? And whether the interaction where principals with the highest amount of demands with the lowest amount of resources would, I assume, be having the highest amount of reported burnout and so on. It is modelled there. As you can see there, at the top there are the 4 different demands, below pointing to the principal's demand. Resources, same thing, and the relationship between burnout and job satisfaction. For the first study, I'm just going to be using one time point for the 2011 participants, for which there are probably 2,000 participants, 3/4 of them being school principals, the remaining assistant school principals, and 56% female. And if you're interested in the state breakdown, I've put it there. But, so, although I'm going to be doing a principal component analysis, I'm also going to be doing a first order model of the COPSOC factors using the CFA just to confirm that the latents do exist in the ballot, because with a principal component analysis that is unable to be determined because it's based on scores instead. For study 2, I'm going to be seeing whether the policy, local schools, local decisions had how it, or if it did increase levels of reported principal autonomy in, and therefore successfully doing what it says it's aiming to do, and also how it impacts the specific resources demands and those associated outcomes with school principals. With the study, it is going to be, so using the 2011 to 2013 data, Yeah, so it's going to be a quasi-natural experiment longitudinal analysis. We broke it down into 3 different groups. So New South Wales, Victoria, and the remaining of the states and territories. The reason being is, so in Victoria, I mentioned before with FISO, the very similar policy to local schools, local decisions, that was already in place prior to data collection in 2011. So I'll go on to the next one there. So we hypothesised that, say, so Victoria would already be up there in, say, high levels of autonomy and demand and so on. Whereas in 2012, so time point 2, that was when local schools, local decisions was implemented within New South Wales. So then I would expect that in there would be an increase in autonomy and demands. The reason I actually haven't specifically put the labels there is because I do want to explore multiple things. In addition, you can see that I have broken autonomy away from that, the jobs resources in general, because I want to look specifically at autonomy. Yeah, so I do, we're looking at 3 different time points, and I do predict that it would be an increase in time 2 for local schools, local decisions. But if it doesn't, then it does imply that the policy itself is in between what it aims to do, but I guess we'll see. Okay, so now looking at the more personal component, passion. So passion in general, again, this is probably a very familiar topic to many people here. It's a very strong inclination towards a particular activity. So you thoroughly enjoy it, you spend a lot of time involved on a regular basis, and you find it important to the extent it becomes part of you. It's, yeah. So Bob Vallerand says that there are 2 distinct types of passion. So there's harmonious passion and obsessive passion. Harmonious passion, well, there's 2 ways passion manifests itself, I should say. Harmonious passion is an activity someone freely chooses to do. So they could leave it anytime they want, whatever. They integrate it well into their lives. It doesn't impact negatively on family or friend relationships and so on. And yeah, they personally endorse it, but they think it actually is important and believe in its legitimacy. Yeah, so knowing if you're harmoniously passionate about an activity, it tends to be associated with lower levels of reported burnout and higher levels of just general positive feelings. Whereas with regards to obsessive passion, there's a contingent motivation. So you're not actually doing the activity just for the activity, you're doing it to be socially accepted or to increase your self-esteem or so on. And this activity consumes the individual. It effectively takes over their lives with regards to their relationships, their health. It just takes priority over everything else. And as you would expect then, that it is thought to be positively associated with reported burnout and yeah. Okay, so this Vallerand's dualistic, why are you laughing? Vallerand's dualistic passion model was initially designed for activities that are like hobby-type activities, activities that people are already freely choosing to do, such as sports and gambling. And there actually are just a few studies that have started to apply this model within the workplace. But the problem is that all the results that are coming out there are a lot of discrepancies, even if it is with very similar industries or populations. And a big issue, I believe, is with regards to the passion criteria. So the current model looks at passion as being dichotomous. It uses a passion criteria, effectively 4 different items to determine just generally how passionate an individual is. And if you're not deemed passionate, then you're removed from the population, because therefore it's not, the manifestations are not relevant to those individuals. With the studies within the workplace, most don't report the extent of this, or they don't report whether they have removed participants, so it's hard to tell what they did. And also, considering just on average within the workplace, with engagement, which is meant to be a lower form, only 11% of employees in general, Deloitte found, were engaged with their work, and then Gallup with 200,000 plus also found that only 13% on average were engaged. So if we're going to apply this dichotomous nature, I don't want to remove effectively 90% of principles. We're trying to help the population as a whole, not just a very small percentage. So I want to know whether I can modify the dualistic passion model so it can be applied to the workplace and holistically to all the school principals rather than those deemed passionate. And if possible, and if that is possible, to what extent does passion influence the extent of reported burnout and other outcomes for school principals. So with this study, we're looking at 2015 and 16 data. The reason being that's 2015 is the first year that the passion model was included in the survey. It will be a reciprocal effects model, and I will be using the passion model and then also using the COPSOC burnout component. However, as I mentioned before, this passion criteria component, although not designed initially to be a part of the main analysis, I'm going to be including that as an additional latent variable, so to determine whether we can make it on a continuum rather than autonomous. I will be doing, with regards to the psychometric analysis, I can do the CFA before it would have been done with burnout. But I'll be using ESEM with regards to the dualistic passion model, because another core reason for the general component, the general passion component, was to just confirm that it was highly correlated with the manifestations of harmonious passion and obsessive passion. So naturally, you'd expect them all to work onto each other. So if we didn't have them being able to work onto each other, then it's definitely not going to produce a model that's going to fit well and we're able to use. Yeah, so just to graphically put it there. So we're also going to. I'm also going to be looking at the interaction between general passion and also obsessive and general and harmonious, because then we also get to see what it would be like were I to have applied the model without general passion, and also whether to determine if it is more just passion in general, which has an impact on burnout and vice versa, to see whether this can be applied within the workplace. Okay, so hopefully, I'll advance research by firstly confirming that the JDR model and theory are valid, gain a better understanding of school principals, demands and resources and their associated outcomes in Australia. I think the key important thing is to see the impact of education policy due to germ, to see how that impacts school principal roles, considering the crisis we're currently in. But also passion itself, I think, is very important with regards to policy implementation, because it actually, in my opinion, will determine whether whether, say, a resource was offered, whether a principal would take up the resource or not. Because if you're obsessively passionate, even if you're provided with 100 extra days of leave, you're not going to be willing to take this leave, compared to if you're harmoniously passionate, it's like, oh yeah, I can just take a break. So I think that's also very relevant. And yeah, but obviously, if passion impacts the school principals. So yeah, I also obviously need to acknowledge, because this is a massive project I'm very fortunate to be a part of, and it has a lot of funding partners, you can see here, because it's evident this is quite an issue that everyone wants to get solved. And a special shout out to Associate Professor Phil Riley, because again, as I say, this is his baby, and even this wouldn't have been possible. And yeah, he's been doing excellent work. Also to Phil and Herb and Reza, and because being my supervisors, I know that they have to practice a lot of patience, especially considering not having a psychology background. They probably have to explain things a bit more or differently compared to the average student they've had, so I really do appreciate it. Amy Maxwell, who's been managing this project from the beginning with Phil Riley with regards to recruitment and maintaining the principles to keep going with the survey, and IPP in general. I started here as a research assistant. I had no idea I was going to do a PhD here, and they've helped me so many times in getting to where I am today, and I feel very blessed, and thank you. So, any questions and discussions, and please be gentle.
So because this is a mock COC, we don't actually have a panel, but it's also a very appropriate time to ask some questions or offer some suggestions, because it's still at a reasonably formative stage.
I have a question. Can you just talk me through the passion model again with the general factor? Are you proposing additional items that measure something different from obsessive and harmonious, or something hierarchical, a 5-factor structure wherein there's a G factor of passion?
The the general passion component I'm putting in there is already created by Valorant, but it was used instead to determine the validity of those two manifestations as a model. It does have items such as I engage, I have a lot of time with this activity, I'm passionate about this activity. It's all those things that what general passion measures. So I'm not sure if it would be considered a hierarchical model.
Will you analyse it hierarchically, or will they be separate constructs?
They'll be separate constructs. Yeah, does that answer your question?
It does. I think I wouldn't, like, if you were, either approach is good, but I'm intrigued by the idea of a bifactor structure of passion as it exists. I think there probably is a G-factor shared across those two styles of passion. I wonder what would be left behind if you took them out.
But that would sort of ruin the theory.
How to divide it? Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Yeah, of course.
You got it.
Valorant has used the general passion scale as a dichotomous cutoff.
Yeah.
And so if you're not passionate, he's not considering you as part of the analysis. And he gets away with that in part because he's finding that most people are passionate about something.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about a specific thing, then the issue that lots of people aren't passionate about that particular activity. So the issue is how to deal with that general scale. And so rather than using it as a dichotomy, Marcus is looking at it as an interactive effect.
I think it's really interesting. Yeah.
Just staying on passion for a moment. I really like, the way you're looking at that. I mean, one of my problems with it has always been, passion is passion, right? And then there might be a secondary thing about how you manage your passion, but that's not passion itself. And so I think the dichotomy is about how you manage passion, not passion itself. So it may be that some of your analysis gets towards something like that.
Oh, yes.
Other questions?
He said we don't talk.
Oh, okay. Do you have aggressive type questions?
Belinda's always got aggressive questions.
Thank you.
Okay, so most of you already know that one of the projects that we're doing here at IPPE is working with the New South Wales Police, and so this is a project coming out of that. Now, several months ago, I guess it was that long ago, we were collectively given an invitation to propose some papers for a special SDT issue of a moderately prestigious journal, and we're invited to put in proposals. And so I threw together a proposal with lots of input from the collective team and beyond, and I haven't put down the co-authors on this because I'm not actually sure who all they are going to be, but it will probably be a long list of people, including Rich Ryan and Ed Dacey and Phil and Teresa and Paul and Jesse and who knows who else. That's why I haven't put down the authors, because it's a work in progress. This is the opening quote from the grant that got funded. I don't know whether I'll actually open the article with that or not, but it's certainly provocative. The study is based upon a survey that was completed by a large number of the New South Wales Police Force, 3,800. And in this presentation, or in this paper, I'm trying to integrate the self-determination theory and the job demand resources model. So we've already talked about the job demand resources model, so that sort of was why I decided to go ahead and present this, because it sort of follows from the other study as well. Okay, so these are the three basic needs. This is at the heart of self-determination theory, and everybody has already been well grounded in this. This is part of the catechism. No, that's a bad term. This is part of the underpinning of one aspect of the institutes. Now, initially, and in most research, the SDT is looking at need satisfaction, and Rich and Ed, and I'm not sure where else, expanded that to include need frustration, arguing that need frustration is more than lack of need satisfaction. Now, this issue of positive and negative is a terribly difficult one, and just about every individual difference variable that you can think of, there's always this issue as to whether or not the positive and negative pole represent two separate factors or one bipolar continuum. And the argument here is that it represents two separate factors. I'll look at that to an extent, maybe not as much as I could have or should have. Okay, so this is the job demand resources model, my interpretation of it. Now, I've done a couple of things. I don't know whether they're unique or not, but they're my take on it. You know, like anything else, when you come up with a good idea that you think is unique, and then you start going and looking at the literature, you find that it's not unique. Somebody proposed it 20 years ago, or at least some other time. And what I've done here is I've got demands and resources, but I'm looking at institutional demands and resources, and then personal demands and resources. And then the outcomes that I'm looking at institutional outcomes and more personal outcomes. And so I'm looking at this as a way of contextualizing the model a little bit further. I'm also looking at the personal demands and resources as potential moderators of the institutional demands and resources. And because it's just interaction effects, moderation is reciprocal. So I can talk about the personal demands and resources moderating the institutional demands and resources, but I could talk about it the other way around because it's just interaction effects. And so looking at the extent to which these interactions influence the outcomes above and beyond the personal demands. Now, initially I had a huge number of variables, many, too many to deal with. And so what I tried to do is I tried to come up with a reasonably finite number of variables that were kind of iconic of each of the categories. So work conflict is the demand, and organizational support is a resource. Mindfulness and coping styles is the avoidance, problem solving, and seeking support. And then I've got some fairly standard kinds of outcomes that are used in this sort of research, although a bit more focus on some of the personal and also on this side, demands are negative things, resources are positive things, and so I've got some negative outcomes in each category and some positive outcomes in each category. Okay, now I've added the SDT to this model, and the critical assumption or prediction of SDT is that pretty much all of these effects on these outcomes will be mediated by psychological needs. Now, whether SDT says that they all will be, or much of them will be, or most of them will be, is not quite clear. But certainly, it's the implication is that lots of them will be. I'm also looking here at interactions, so I'm looking at the looking at the extent to which these 6 need, satisfaction, frustration are moderated by the personal demands. So, and whether these interactions influence the outcomes at all. This is 24 interactions times 6 outcomes. So I've now got a model with several hundred interactions, because there's interactions. There's 8 interactions times 6 outcomes, that's 48. And so interactions are, one interaction is difficult to look at and complicated. Hundreds make it that much more complicated. So what am I doing that's new? Well, I think what I'm doing that's new, and I think Rich were here to correct me as to what is actually new. Looking at the perspective of SDT from the set of 6 psychological needs, decomposing the scales into the effects of domain and direction in their interaction. So these 6 scales can actually be seen as a 3x2 analysis of variance, in which you have a main effect or a first order effect of domain and a first order effect of direction and a domain by direction interaction. So I think that's a new, but I don't actually know whether it's been looked at before. And then also looking at the extent to the personal demands moderate, and whether these, how these line up with the personal versus the institutional, whether the institutional demands mostly go to the institutional outcomes, which is what I'm proposing. Integrating the SDT and the 2 perspectives and the job demands resource model, we're testing the prediction that most of the effects will be mediated by the psychological needs. Test whether or not the effects of the psychological needs are also moderated by the personal resources. So this basic model is what I'm looking at. And so I'm going to overwhelm you with data analysis, because I haven't done a good enough job of summarizing it yet. And I wish I could keep this on one of these slides, so as a touchstone, because everything sort of obviously relates back to this basic slide. Okay, so first of all, I started off with a factor analysis, and one of the approaches to factor analysis that we've been playing with is something called set eSIM. And so eSIM is a compromise of the best aspects of CFA and exploratory factor analysis that almost always fits the data better and has some advantages. The set eSIM is where you keep different sets separate, but include them in the same model. So this means that the SDT variables can cross-load on each other, but they can't cross-load on any of the demands or resources or the outcomes. And I don't have all the factor loadings here, but I've got most of them, and you can see particularly this group here is the SDT. They're all well defined, and I haven't got the goodness of fit, but it's quite respectable. It's close to or at 0.95 for the CFI and so forth. So given that we're starting off with 98 indicators and 18 latent variables, it's a reasonably well-defined factor structure. So here's correlations among them. Probably the most interesting and important ones are among the SDT factors. They're highly correlated, but not so highly correlated that they aren't distinguishable. The need satisfaction are positively correlated, the need frustration are positively correlated, and the need are negatively correlated with the frustration factors. And the largest factors, cross factors, are for the matching domains. So that's autonomy satisfaction with autonomy frustration and so on and so forth. So the correlation pattern makes sense. Here we've got the relationship to the outcomes. I'll go into this later on in a little more detail, but at the very least you can see that for the most part the factors are substantial. There's a pattern of positive and negative correlations that make sense in terms of the outcomes being positive or negative, and the SCT being positive or negative. The psychological needs are logically related to the demands and resources. Again, the pattern of positive and negative all sort of makes sense. And there's strong relationships between the demands and the outcomes. So there's lots of, so the total effects of demands and outcomes, demands and resources and outcomes are substantial. So there's clearly something to mediate. So we've got a reasonable ability to look at mediation. Okay, so I'm not actually sure I put some, yes, okay. So here I'm looking at how well the need satisfaction are related to the institutional and personal outcomes. The ones I've got highlighted here are the unique variances explained by the 3 satisfaction scales, and that's unique variance explained by the 3 frustration scales. So that sort of matches up. So the positive outcomes are more explained by satisfaction, need satisfaction, and the negative ones are more related to need frustration. You can see that there's some anomalies here, but mostly it kind of makes sense. Clearly, the autonomy satisfaction is the strongest, but other scales have an input as well. Okay, so here I'm trying to say, let's see if this, yeah, okay. Here I'm trying to say, can we get away with a subset of scales? Do we need 6 scales? And so here's the mean of the 3 satisfaction, the mean of the 3 frustrations. Here's the a total autonomy, a total competence, a total relatedness, and a grand total. This one is showing that the autonomy is clearly dominating, but there's still other variants. So the multiple R is higher than the autonomy in each case, but not that much. So at least with these outcomes, clearly autonomy is a really important sort of factor. Here's my analysis of variance sort of breakdown of these. So this is variance explained by direction, that is satisfaction versus frustration, and clearly that's the most important. The difference between domains is not very important, but there is an interaction between them, so that that the effective domain does depend upon the direction. And that's consistent with what we looked at before, where the positive ones are more important for the positive outcomes, and the negative are more important for the negative outcomes. Yes, okay, that's just showing that, highlighting that the direction is the most important one. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Okay, good. I thought I had a blank table there. Here I'm looking at, this is variance explained by the different scales, different aspects in the model. So this is how much of the variance and the outcome can be explained by the demands and resources, and I've broken it down into the institutional and the personal. And you can see that the institutional demands and resources dominate the institutional outcomes, and the personal dominate the personal outcomes. So that distinction is holding up pretty well. Here I've got the 8 interactions. This is the interactions between the demands and resources, and they're pretty disappointing. And although there's lots of interactions that are summarized here, when I went back and looked at them individually, the number that were statistically significant was less than the nominal significance level. So less than 5% are significant at the 5% chance level. So that's pretty disappointing. So it means that aspect. I wanted to be able to test whether these interactions were mediated by the needs, but I can't do that because there's no interactions to mediate, so it's a non-goer. The psychological needs add considerably above and beyond just the demands and resources, so they're important in their own right as well as mediators. I'll get to the mediating later on. And then this is this huge block of hundreds of interactions, and again I found very few that were statistically significant. The unique variance accounted for them is significant because there's so many of them and the sample size is so large, but looking at them individually, far less than 5%. It was more like 1% were significant at a nominal 0.05 level. So basically that's saying that the effect of needs on these outcomes is not mediated by the personal demands and resources, particularly mindfulness, and the assumption that what I was hoping or what I was thinking was that mindfulness might be moderating some of these, but it's also some of the coping strategies as well. So here I'm looking at just one of the outcomes to give you an idea of what I'm looking at. So this is commitment, and this is the effect of the total effect of each of these, and then I've divided it into direct and indirect effects. So the direct effect is the effect of organizational support on commitment, and the indirect support, the indirect effect is the bit that's mediated by the psychological needs. So SDT would want this line to be very big, and it's not too big. And obviously, then I've looked at the ratio. When you run into some problems with ratios like this one, where you have suppression, and so the indirect effect is bigger than the total effect, and so but the total effect is pretty small. For commitment, the overall ratio, roughly half of it is mediated, half of it's not. I suspect that would be disappointing to SDT people. Here's what I've got for all of the different outcomes, and you can see that the amount that's mediated is not very substantial in most cases, and even when it does look substantial, there's not much to mediate where the effects are small. And this is sort of a summary, and so this 0.36 is the mean of the ratio of indirect to direct effects. So roughly a third of the effects of demands and resources on outcomes are mediated by the SDT variables. Summary of the main findings: the factor analysis and structural equation model provided support for the extension of the SDT to include need, frustration, as well as satisfaction. The effects of psychological needs were driven more by the direction of the domain than the domain, but the domain does interact with that as well. On average, approximately a third of the effects of demands and resources are mediated, which means 2/3 aren't. So whether we're happy with a 1/3 full, 2/3 empty class, I would suspect that the SDT people probably aren't that happy with that. But clearly the mediation, the extent of mediation varies with the nature of the outcome and the nature of the demands and resources. The psychological needs were largely not moderated by personal demands and resources. That will probably make the SDT people happy. And the institutional and resources were not moderated. The institutional demands and resources were largely not moderated, so that there was really no test of whether or not those moderations were mediated by the cycle. So there's all sorts of fancy statistical models looking at moderated mediation and mediated moderation and so forth, but because there was no moderation, they aren't particularly relevant. Obviously, limitations are the causal ordering, and we will get around that because we will have more ways of the data, and it's quite likely that some of these variables are reciprocally related, so we'll be looking at that. Limitation is that everything here is self-report, and so there's probably a common method bias that may influence or bias the relationships between the variables. The focus of both the strength and the limitation was, it was based on a very specific workplace setting, and we looked at a purposely extensive number of variables, but it's also important to realize that there's lots of other outcomes and lots of other demands and lots of other resources that could have been considered, and we did show that even within the ones that we had, that there was that the result varied substantially depending upon the outcome, depending upon the demand and the resource. So this is what I need to wrap up, and I think the deadline, what's the deadline? Sometime in March. So not too long to pull this study together. But there's some interesting contributions that I think are relevant to SDT within a workplace environment. So questions, and please be happy to be provocative because this still is a somewhat formative stage. I saw Phil grinning when he said, yeah.
So this seems pretty ambitious for a PhD project. I'm just wondering. The lack of mediation, is that the pathway from X to M that's the problem, or the path from M to Y? So, you know, from an SDT perspective, is the issue that demands and resources are not predicting psychological needs, or is it the problem that psychological needs are not predicting outcomes?
A bit of both, but it's the psychological. Well, the psychological needs are strongly predicting outcomes, and demands and resources are strongly predicting outcomes. And only some of this variance is mediated by the psychological needs. So there's lots of unique new variance that's explained by psychological needs that is not necessarily, that is part of the mediation. So these links and these links are both strong, but these links are strong as well. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
And not that I think you should present any more results, but nevertheless, did you actually test if the interactions predicted the outcomes without psychological needs?
Yeah.
And did they?
No.
No?
No.
That's going to be hard for the JDR people.
Huh?
That's going to be hard for the JDR people.
Yeah.
The paper's called Herb Pisses Off Everyone.
But you're right, I will have to go back and make that clear in the paper, because it here is not made particularly clear. Yeah.
Under a section called Your Theory Sucks.
There's only one demand, isn't there? Work conflict?
What?
Like, in terms of, I'm just thinking in terms of Teresa's question, it's the interaction between demands and resources that we're looking for, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the interactions that he's talking about between institutional and personal. But included in those 1 demand and 3 resources, is that?
The personal has 3 resources: mindfulness, problem seeking, and seeking support, and 1 demand, avoidance, if you look at it as positive and negative. Whereas here we've only got 1 demand and 1 resource.
Is that the, I know, sorry, I have my own question, but is that the interaction that you were saying the JDR people were looking for?
They would look at that by predicting outcomes directly without the mediation of the moderation.
So what Teresa is asking is, what's this before we add the psychological needs? And, yeah.
You're even doing worse than chance. You're like,
Pardon?
you're detecting fewer than you would expect if it was just a random data set.
Yeah.
So you're like systematically unlucky.
Actually, I kind of think I was systematically lucky because trying to summarize the results of 200 interaction effects.
Yeah. That would be fun.
My question was about, somewhere one of the slides it said basically autonomy was more important than relationship, and that was more important than competence.
Yeah.
For me, that's interesting in the police, given the context of the police.
Yeah.
If I had to predict, I would say that based on the other research we've done, the places where officers are given some degree of discretion and autonomy, they're doing a lot better than in the situations where it's very command and control. I just think that's something that's probably worthwhile highlighting in the paper is,
Let's see, where is that?
why that might have happened. That one.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you look at there, the relationship ones are also very important. Well, I don't know. It's
Well,
hard to distinguish. They're all kind of important. But
Is that a regression or just?
No. Those are just single variables. So these are really just correlations.
Relations.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I'm just thinking about how you write it up. It would seem to me that there's some theoretical justification for differences between those.
Yes, and I'll give that aspect of it to you to write up.
I knew you were going to say that.
Does anybody else want to volunteer any co-authors?
It'd be interesting with Coburn because, I mean, is the threat to autonomy being considered like it's because I have a bad relationship with my boss? In other words, do they conflate those two? My boss is overbearing and tell me to do everything and micromanage, and I have bad relationships. So it'd be interesting to look at the unique variance. Maybe autonomy really comes out more when you do that. You know what I mean?
No, I didn't quite
We have better relationships with people who support our autonomy. So is it? I'm just wondering what's the unique effect here.
Oh, well, yeah. If we go, those are just correlations. But if you go down here, is it here? Okay. No, that's not going to get it.
What Joseph wants you to do is look at the interaction of relationship and autonomy.
The interaction? No.
I like to do another interaction. Now, all I'm saying is that
Autonomy, control.
if you have great relationships at work, that just may mean I get on with my boss.
Okay, so here's the predictions, and so autonomy is very important for the 2 institutional outcomes, but it's moderately important for the others as well.
See how relatedness kind of drops in proportion? You see that? That's what I was saying. I think autonomy is really about relationships, or relationships are about autonomy.
Yeah, and that's always the case when you've got correlated variables.
Yeah, but I think with the police, is, like in a workplace especially, like with friends, there's not, like, autonomy and relatedness seem more separate. You know, it's not like your friend is bossing you around. But in a workplace, it's hierarchical. The relationship and the hierarchy are kind of together.
Other comments, suggestions?
A hero is looking for big fish, little pond. On a more serious note, do you think that need frustrations and need satisfactions and need frustrations may be subject to that frame of reference? That with people around you in workplace, their needs are more satisfied than yours. And
Well,
I'm glad to see that I have you all trained into looking at big fish, little projects. It's quite interesting because Joseph just discovered a new one yesterday.
Dinner did, but we didn't know that.
That you didn't even know it until
we didn't
you.
even know it until we.
We were actually explaining it as the opposite effect,
Hmm.
and it challenged your theory. No, we didn't say it.
You thought it was a challenge to your theory, to my theory, until you actually looked at it and you realized it was quite consistent.
All paths lead to the big fish little pond.
But are there any other questions or suggestions on this one? Okay, well, thank you very much. And